I've been following now for 17 years the science behind vitamin D, and I'm excited to see what we can open your mind about today. My name is Tom Malterre. I have a few degrees in nutritional sciences from Bass University. I'm an educator for the Institute for Functional Medicine. I've been a medical affairs team member at a past supplement company for over 7 years, lectured across the entire North America multiple times on nutritional biochemistry topics. I'm a father of 5 children, love to jump into the mountains whenever I can with them and get to the skateboard tracks. So gosh, let's jump in. Basically, I want to be clear. This is for educational purposes. This is for us espousing information to you so you can better your life. And everything that we're talking about today is scientifically based. So please keep your eyes peeled for references at the bottom of the pages if you want to know where the science comes from. All right. So why is vitamin D important to you? You know, it's interesting, right? Because vitamin D itself is much more than a vitamin. It is something that modulates life on this planet. I mean, sunshine. Without the sun, where would we be, right? So the sun is a particular distance from the Earth. We're the third rock from the sun. And if we were any closer, we'd be crispy. If we were any farther, we'd be ice. There's this perfect distance where we're allowed to then capture or harness the energy of a star to allow for life on this planet. There's no life on the moon. There's no life on Mars that we know of. I mean, my goodness, this is an amazing opportunity. And it occurs because we're able to utilize the energy from the sun without harming ourselves too much. Isn't that fascinating? So we have this radiation. This radiation comes down and you know, you have underneath your skin this substance called 7-dehydrocholesterol. It's a cholesterol. And when the sun's rays at a particular frequency, it have to be a particular strength, otherwise it doesn't occur, will strike your skin and they'll break a little what's called 9-10 carbon bond. And then that allows for the natural formation, isomerization of vitamin D. Then this vitamin travels to the kidney and then, to the liver, and then it travels to the kidney and other tissues. In fact, every single cell on the human body is shown to have receptor sites for vitamin D. Every single cell. It's much more than a vitamin. In fact, this is a hormone. It's what's called a corticosteroid hormone. And what does that mean? What is a hormone? Well, a hormone is something that's made in one tissue organ system and travels to a different tissue and changes its gene expression. Gene expression. I mean, you know this when it comes to bone, right? You've seen this, New England Journal of Medicine. This is a November 8th, 2007 article. And it shows that the enterocyte, the intestinal cell, when influenced by adequate vitamin D, will start making different things. I mean, what are genes, right? Genes are templates. Genes are these like little wrapped up pieces of information in what's called a double helix. And you pop open that double helix, and that becomes a template for making proteins. So you go ahead and you drop in different amino acids on these different things from your DNA, right? Via something called RNA. And then you manufacture these proteins. And what do these proteins do? Well, these proteins carry out different functions in each and every cell of the human body. So when you have adequate vitamin D, what happens? You go down and you talk to your intestinal cell and say, make more proteins that bring in calcium. You know this, right? Everybody's like, vitamin D, calcium, osteoporosis, osteomalacia, right? Everybody knows about those. But check this out. Vitamin D does this to hundreds of different genes. Not just intestinal cell calcium absorption proteins. So what happens, right? You have enough vitamin D, you start making these proteins, right? The TRPV6 and calbindin, and you start making these things and it pulls in more calcium from the intestinal tract. Now, you're more efficient at taking calcium out of your intestines and putting it in the body. In fact, when you have adequate vitamin D, you get about 30 to 40% of your dietary calcium in through the intestinal wall. If you're pregnant or lactating, 80% of the calcium. But if you're insufficient in vitamin D, you don't have enough, it could be 10. Maybe if you're lucky, 15%. So that means you're getting 3, 4, up to 8 times more calcium when you're making specific proteins because you have adequate vitamin D within your cells. Isn't that wild? Check this out, right? we actually have this whole process that's occurring on multiple different areas of your genes in many, in fact, all tissues of the human body. Let me make this clear. You're sitting there, right? And what you're seeing in this picture here is you're seeing this blue thread, right? Which is part of your DNA that is going to be read now by a specific reading apparatus. And this response element is what it's called, is going to respond only when we have adequate vitamin D. Meaning your genes are sitting there, each and every cell of your body. Your genes are sitting there and they are waiting to be read. And they cannot be read until they receive certain signals. And in this particular case, many of these different response elements need two different signals, vitamin A and vitamin D. And when you have both of these things, they change the shape, they change the form of these what's called repressor complexes. They pop off, and then all of a sudden you can read your genes. So this is an entire process we call information, right? You have a cell, and the DNA can be read to make all these fantastic proteins that change the cell's behavior. They change the outcome of the cell. But they cannot occur until you change the shape. So you bring in A, you bring in D, you bind these little pockets, and when you do that, it changes the shape of the top of that response element, and it lets the co-repressor complex off, and now it fits beautifully for an activator complex. And that activator complex comes on, and you read your genes. So this is not just about a vitamin for calcium. It's about normal cellular function. So many people don't make these associations. I thought this was fascinating. Out of the multitude, I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands and thousands of studies now coming out about the multitude of benefits of vitamin D. Whether, you've got challenges with mood or you've got challenges with, different physiological functions, vitamin D has an effect. I bet you didn't guess this one though. So this is my second cousin, Dr. Craig Pletnikoff. He had a study that was coming out of the Mayo Clinic proceedings, and he started to see these associations between his dark pigmented clients, he had some Somali clients in Minnesota, and this non-specific musculoskeletal discomfort. So he's like, that's weird. 93% of the people who come in with this non-specific musculoskeletal discomfort have a vitamin D insufficiency. I wonder if there's a correlation. Well, another group looked at this and said, well, yeah, we took 360 patients. We noticed that they had abnormally low vitamin D levels in 83% of them. We give them 5 to 10,000 IUs of vitamin D per day, and 95% of them, 95% had resolution in low back discomfort. So this is fascinating because at the time, I had some observational studies of my own, right? I was a medical massage therapist. I did accident injury work. And I had this gentleman come in. And he was one of those people who was like really, really sensitive to touch. He had low back discomfort. And, I'd be working on him. He's like, yeah. It was like incredible for him. Well, this gentleman is Hawaiian. And it was interesting because he had, beautiful dark skin pigmentation color. And he would go to Hawaii, and then I wouldn't see him in the clinic for a long time. He wouldn't come in for body work. And I was like, that's interesting. And then maybe 3 months after he comes back from Hawaii, and we'd have to work on him for a number of months. And so it's interesting now that we're starting to see these associations. We're starting to see these associations in some research, in discomfort research, where you're hearing these doctors saying, this is fascinating. When you have an insufficiency of D, there's an upregulation of discomfort in musculoskeletal tissue. Well, I had a conversation with a researcher, and she laid out this incredible theory. She said, Tom, I have a hypothesis, I have a theory. And that is the human body allows for itself to be injured for a while, allows itself to have a lot of chemical soups that are going around trying to repair tissue and damage and whatnot. And then after about a 48-hour period, she had noticed the cells will upregulate themselves. And they'll upregulate a specific protein called the 1-hydroxylase protein that makes more active hormone vitamin D. And when the cells make this active hormone, vitamin D, all of a sudden, they totally change their behavior. So if you're a macrophage and you are in the central nervous system and you are combating some sort of response there, 48 hours, you go at it, you repair, attack, do whatever you have to do. But then after that 48 hours, the 1-hydroxylase enzyme gets upregulated within that macrophage, and then all of a sudden its behavior completely changes. It migrates out of the tender areas of the central nervous system, like the brain and the spinal cord, ends up more in the lymph, ends up more in the spleen, somewhere else that won't do harm. If there are too many of those particular cells around, they'll actually kill themselves. So the hypothesis is we have about a 48-hour window. We upregulate the 1-hydroxylase, and the vitamin D kind of acts as a turn-off switch in many cases. So there's a lot of people out there, a lot of researchers who are hypothesizing that vitamin D is a master regulatory agent in cell function. All right, so it's a hormone. It's in every single cell of the body. It's incredibly important for many different things. But what's the problem? Because in my clinical practice, there's a ton of data out there on vitamin D, and people are like, yes, I love vitamin D. Yes, I want vitamin D. And we test their levels, and their levels are still low. So why is that? What is the reason that people are being held back from optimal health? What is the reason? Well, I found 5. So I'm going to share those with you. So reason number 1, people are oftentimes not getting enough. So they're being told by their doctor, you need a level of 18 to 20 nanograms per ml and you're fine. Or, you just take 600 IUs per day. And they do take that 600 IUs. And what happens? Their levels stay around 18. They'll stay around, lower than 18. And they're not really going where they need to go. Their behavior is not changing. Their cell behavior is not changing. Their symptomology is not changing. Perhaps they have low mood. Perhaps they have an accelerated version of musculoskeletal discomfort. Perhaps they have, all sorts of different metabolic conditions that can be associated. And they're not getting better. Well, it turns out, I'm going to share with you, those recommendations are way too low. Okay. The other thing is, I still have this. People coming up to me and saying, hey, Tom, it's okay. I'm going to get my vitamin D. I'm going to go out in the sun. I'm like, really? It's February. How's that going to happen? We'll talk about that. And then other clients, it depends. It might be something in their gastrointestinal tract that's keeping them from absorbing supplemental D or D that's actually coming from the diet. And then still another subset of people, both via medications and via chemicals they're exposed to in their food and their environment, are actually having a situation where their vitamin D is being degraded. So we'll talk about that as well. All right, not getting enough. So originally, it was about 2010, 2011 that we started getting bombarded by information from the Institute of Medicine, and they came out with a report of our recommended daily allowances for the United States population and abroad. And they said, all right, gang, we want you at X amount. Well, I'm going to show you some data that shows that perhaps that is not as accurate as they would like. And then other people are saying, it's okay, I'll get enough from my food and or fortification of my food. And I'm going to show you some data that's going to say, let's question that. Okay, when you're listening to people about what your recommendation should be, I would hope you're listening to people who have an entire career in vitamin D research. And when you do listen to people who have an entire career of vitamin D research, and they look at the global aspect of what vitamin D might be associated with, you're going to see that the recommendations are going to range around 40 to 60 nanograms per ml as your ideal level. Now, the challenge with that is that we have people, and that was Grassroots Health, by the way, grassrootshealth.org. Please write that down, grassrootshealth.org. They're an amazing institution. I mean, they've really done a fantastic job of looking at vitamin D in a population of people who runs tests through them, and then educating the populace about, what's the optimal level, how can you get your levels up. It's fantastic. I'll show you another slide later too. Okay, so grassrootshealth.org, definitely go check them out. But 40 to 60 nanograms per ml is what they're coming up with, and they had, some people who have been spending their entire careers in vitamin D come up with those recommendations. Now, you're going to hear other recommendations. One's from the Institute of Medicine, the other one's from the Endocrine Society, and then, of course, Grassroots Health, right? And the Institute of Medicine was interesting. They were tasked with just looking at the research regarding bone health. That's it, bone health. So they ignored at that time, well, 2010, 2011, there wasn't as much data as they would have liked to expand beyond the bone. Well, since that time frame, we've had tens of thousands of articles come out showing that vitamin D has association with a multitude of different things. After all, it's a hormone. It has effects in every single cell of the human body. It changes gene expression. So of course, we see when people have severe vitamin D insufficiencies or deficiencies, they have all sorts of health problems. And when those levels get up, they have less problems. So IOM, really low, 20 nanograms per ml. They're recommending between 400, 600, maybe 800 if you're above the age of 70 IUs per day. And they say that should get you to the 20 nanograms per ml. All right, Endocrine Society, they go a little higher. They say 30 nanograms per ml. And they say, well, maybe you're going to need, 1,000 or 1,500 or 2,000 IUs to get up to that level. Well, when we look at the actual data of what's happening in populations, many people are never reaching that level. Many people maybe will get to the 20 nanogram per ml, but they're not getting to the 30 nanogram per ml. And if you're relying on food alone, just to get 400 IUs per day, the vast majority of the population will never touch that. Meaning, really, it's very difficult to get enough vitamin D from your food. All right, so what do you do then? Let's say you wanted to get to your 40 nanogram per ml, and you're saying to yourself, well, my doctor said I need to be taking 5,000 IUs of vitamin D. That should do it. Or 2,000 IUs of vitamin D, or 1,000 IUs of vitamin D, or even 600 IUs of vitamin D. That should do it. I should get to my desired level. And this research here, Dr. Heaney is great about this. It's really shown us there's a massive change from person to person. Meaning, I might take 5,000 IUs of vitamin D, and my level might be at 20. You might take 5,000 IUs of vitamin D, and your level might be 120. So really, the message behind what's coming out in the research is you have to test. And when you test, you're looking for 25 hydroxy cholecalciferol, 25 hydroxy D. So go into the doctor's office. Yes, I'd like to test my D. Unfortunately, it's not reimbursed by insurance because of the IOM numbers that came out in 2010, 2011. So now you just have to pay out of pocket. Thankfully, you can go to grassrootshealth.org, spend 65, 70 bucks, get a finger prick test, mail it in, easy peasy. Go to your doctor, spend 50, 60, 70 bucks, and get your vitamin D levels tested. Ideally, you would get tested multiple times per year. You would try and test at the peak level, which is going to be August, right? August, September, at the end of summer, when you get all this sun and everybody's, loving it outdoors, right? That's when you want to test and say, oh, that's my peak level. And then you want to test again around February, where you haven't really had much at all, right? And then ideally you would test again somewhere in the springtime, just to get like a 3 time per year span to determine how much your levels fluctuate, because as you're going to see later on, they can fluctuate quite a bit, right? So get tested for vitamin D. It looks like at least 30, ideally 40 to 60 nanograms per ml might be beneficial. So this chart, once again, grassrootshealth.org, go check it out, is very helpful. Because let's say you're hovering around a 10 and you want to get to a 50. If you follow this little chart here, it says here, I'm currently at a 10, I want to get to a 50. That means I might need to take 5,300 IUs per day to get there. Now, granted, I have a physician friend who runs vitamin D testing on everybody, and they said, if you're increasing your vitamin D at 5,000 IUs per day, you'll jump about 2 nanograms per week. So you might need to wait a little while. If you wanted to jump up from a 10 to a 50, that's 40 nanogram jump that you want to take at a 2 nanogram per week. That's 20 weeks time before your levels are going to be up there. So be patient and stick with it. Be consistent. Now, that IOM report is really throwing people for a loop, right? They're saying, oh my gosh, all I need is 400, 600 IUs. That's easy. I'll just eat some fish here and take a supplement every once in a while. And my doctor says I'll be fine. I'm at an 18 or 20 nanogram per ml and my doctor says I'm fine. Well, holy smokes. There are papers now that are showing that those recommendations may be way off. In order for 97.5, which is usually how they do RDAs, recommended daily allowances, 97.5% of the population to get up to that 20 nanogram per ml, looking at the statistics from the IOM papers themselves, these researchers argue it might take 8,800, so 8,895 IUs to make sure that 97.5% of the population gets to that level. Wait, what does that mean? I mean, really what it's saying is like, yeah, some people will take 4,000 IUs or 2,000 IUs and their levels will be fine. They'll get up to a 20 nanogram, but there's such a huge variation. And we're going to talk about some of those things. It could be your BMI. It could be that you have active adipocytes that are sucking up all your vitamin D. It could be your age and you have terrible conversion of vitamin D or absorption of vitamin D. It could be you have some sort of intestinal issue. It could be you have chemical exposures. Whatever it is, the variation is massive. So each particular person might have a different response. So you got to watch out for that. All right, this is again, Dr. Heaney. This is the grassroots health data. And they're saying, look, after about 3,600 patients going through our vitamin D testing, we would have to agree that the IOM study, look, 600 IUs, no way. On average, we're finding around 3,875 IUs will bring a person to 20 nanograms per ml. We're seeing that 6,201 will bring them to 30, and 9,122 IUs will bring 97.5% of the population to 40 nanograms per ml. So really, it might take a lot more than you would imagine. So be conscious of that and make sure that you are getting enough vitamin D. All right. Now, once again, there are different factors that are going to increase this. You might need twice as much if you're an elderly person, you don't have a good job of the conversion of the vitamin D, and if you're overweight. So I find oftentimes with my clients who have high BMIs, we have to give them sometimes 1.5, 2 times as much vitamin D to see those levels climb. And many of you out there are saying, oh, come on, didn't they fortify food to make sure that I get enough vitamin D? Well, yes, they did. But if you look at the research on that, you'll see that, in milk samples, for example, in one trial, only 29% had within 20% of the label, 21% had none. So it's a super scientific way of vitamin D fortification of milk products, right? They'll take a big bag of powdered vitamin D, throw it on the floor, crack it open with a shovel, and shovel it into the milk and then mix it up, right? So it's pretty inconsistent how much you might get. Fish and fish oil. Many of us are saying, oh yeah, I do this cod liver oil. I'm supposed to have a high level of vitamin D. Well, hopefully now your cod liver oil is filtered, right? There are a bunch of studies now and some independent trials and lab analysis of non-filtered cod liver oil, and they're showing higher levels of toxic byproducts, whether those are chemicals from the environment like PCBs, DDT, or they're rancid. So be cautious of that. And then also, fish itself. If you're consuming a 3.5 ounce serving of fish, maybe you'll get about 500 IUs. And what did we say? The minimum for that 20, according to Grassroots Health, was 38. 97.5% of the population had to have over 8,000. So 500 IUs is likely not going to cut it. All right. The other piece is this, right? We have people who say, great, no worries. I love vitamin D. I think it's great. I think I need it. And I'm going to get it from the sun. All right. Well, let's talk about that. How can you get it from the sun? Well, you have to get yourself out in the middle of the day, between 11 and 2 oftentimes, and you have to make sure that you don't have any sort of barriers on your skin, including beautiful dark skin pigmentation. And you have to make sure that you're positioned during a time of year and a certain place on the planet to have the radiation strong enough to convert that vitamin D in your skin. We have this thing called the ozone layer. And if you are directly below and the radiation can't pass through that ozone layer and it hits it at an oblique angle, at a diagonal that's too steep diagonal, it will bounce off the ozone layer. It'll get absorbed in the ozone layer. What if you have pollution? What if you have cloud cover? All those things will change the frequency of that radiation. So what we see in the data is that people who live above the 35th parallel or below the 35th parallel on the other side of the equator, the people who live above the 35th parallel will have a difficult time with converting vitamin D in their skin. So where is this? This is Bakersfield, California. This is, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, Raleigh, North Carolina. All those areas up north, oftentimes in the fall, winter, early spring, are not getting enough sun frequency, enough UV radiation power to break that little bond in their skin. Look at this. This is NASA spectral scans. So we're looking at the actual radiation frequency. This is October. And over in the left-hand side corner is North America. And you'll see if we're getting into that little orange range, maybe even green might be okay, but definitely not turquoise and purple. Those aren't going to be enough, frequencies, enough radiation strength to make vitamin D. So this is October. Oh, November, it gets worse. There's only a little couple areas, that might be okay. Florida seems to be okay. California, Texas areas, they seem to be okay. Everybody else is not. January, forget about it. There's very little conversion in a lot of different areas. April, it starts popping back up again, but still Northwest, East Coast, North, the elevated side of the East Coast. And then boom, August, totally fine. So really you need to track this. Really, you kind of have to determine if you're going to be a sun worshiper and you want to make sure that you're getting adequate vitamin D exposure, it'd be a good idea to download an app like this one. It's called the DMinder App. It's free. And you look at that and it shows you once you enter in, your skin pigmentation color, your age, your size, your BMI, your location. It will estimate for you how long you need to be outside in order to get adequate vitamin D exposure. And recognize that vitamin D is going to be correlated with the amount of skin surface you have available. So let's say, for example, I go outside and I just have my face, my neck, and my hands exposed. That's like 6% of my body, right? If I get something called a minimal erythemal dose, so an adequate dose to get me enough vitamin D without burning too much, I might get about 600 IUs. Not a lot. So I might need to then wear short sleeves or wear shorts or, take my shirt off or do whatever I need to do to increase the amount of surface area that I have for creating vitamin D. So that's something to be conscious of. And if you're ever going out with sunscreen, holy smokes, SPF of 8 blocks 92.5% of conversion. SPF of 15 over 98%. So really, you're getting very little vitamin D conversion if you have any sunscreen on at all. We'll have to have a different conversation about all the chemicals that are in sunscreens and really make sure you're making wise choices. This can be a huge exposure to toxicity when you're using the wrong sunscreen. And let's talk about that minimal erythemal dose. That minimal erythemal dose is basically, the amount you can get before you cause skin damage. And at that same amount of time, right, you want to get enough vitamin D. So basically you're looking for a person like myself who's Caucasian. I would get a light pinking of the skin, right? Before I get dark red and I have a lot of skin damage, it's that light pinking. So now I got my vitamin D, but I didn't create a lot of damage. Now the interesting thing is, as people's pigment goes up, so they have these beautiful olive tone skin or like this beautiful, very dark skin here, you have a longer period of time before you actually reach that point. So I myself, 10, 15 minutes, boom, I get a lot of vitamin D. A person with olive tone skin might need, 2 to 3 times that much. A person with even darker skin might need, 2 hours of sun exposure before they're reaching that point. So in essence, melanin is a natural sunscreen. In order to get adequate vitamin D levels with darker skin pigmentation, you have to be out in it midday in the sun, 11 to 2 for quite some time. So take that into consideration. And then, of course, many of us are doing sun avoidance, right? We're being told by dermatologists you're going to have lots of skin issues. And I did attend a fascinating presentation at UCSD that actually argued that when you have adequate vitamin D levels, you'll actually have less skin cancer. So there is a balance, right? You need to get adequate vitamin D, but you don't want to burn too much. All right. Now, this is something we're not being told, and I think it's fascinating. We now know that the levels that we're being told of vitamin D may be inadequate, right? So taking 400 or 600 IUs is not going to get us where we want to go. We might have to go higher levels. We now know that we probably want to make sure we're conscious of how much sun is striking our skin and converting to vitamin D. We might want an app to help us with that conversion. But did you know that there are chemicals in our environment, in our food supply, that may be causing problems right now? So what are those chemicals in the food supply that may be causing problems? Well, medications, so I guess that's not food supply you're taking as a medication, and then phthalates and BPA. Phthalates are those softening agents. They're used to bind oil and water or soften plastics. BPA softens plastics. The phthalates commonly are in fragrances, for example. The BPA, you know, is in cans, and it's in bottles, and it's in lots of different things. So we're now seeing that when you have certain exposures, you may be increasing the levels of these chemicals in the body and the vitamin D levels go down. We may see that you're taking a specific medication and your vitamin D levels go really low. So this has been known for quite some time, And this was actually shared with this author. He told me about this directly in a cab ride when we were at a conference together. He says, hey, keep your eye on Pixar, because I think the research on this is fascinating. On Pixar, what is Pixar? You mean the animation thing? No, not Pixar, the animation thing. No, Pixar is something called the pregnane X receptor. And when there are certain chemicals in your environment, they will activate this receptor. And what does this receptor do? It's a response element. What does it do? It causes gene expression to change. What kind of genes are changed? Well, there's a specific protein, it's an enzyme, that breaks down vitamin D. It's called 24-hydroxylase. It totally adds in a little group onto the vitamin D that makes the vitamin D get broken down by the human body. So not a good thing. We see not only do the BPA and the phthalates activate this specific gene, this pixar gene, much like the medications do, but we also see that there's research now showing that as these levels go up, we have the actual issue with vitamin D going down. By the way, this is a wonderful review. That's not that research, but there's no silver lining. Oh my gosh, you have to read about BPA and canned foods. Now, the neat thing though, there is a solution. This is a solution. The solution is eating fresh foods. Fresh foods, what do you mean by that, Tom? Well, when you're going out and you're going to the farmer's market and you're collecting your organic meats and vegetables and fruits and everything else you're going to do, they're not going to be in packaging. So you're not going to get your meat, wrapped in packaging. Maybe you're going to get your meat wrapped in wax paper, right? Or you're going to go grab a bottle of milk from the farmer's market. It's going to be in glass. It's not going to be in plastic, right? Well, by eating a fresh food diet, we see that you can reduce people's BPA levels in their systems by 2/3, 66%. And phthalates from like plastic wraps and cooking in Tupperware and whatnot, 53 to 56% reduction. Just from eating a fresh food diet. 3 days, look at this. So you go and you have the pre-diet, and then you go in 3 days, levels drop tremendously. So what does that mean to you? That means, gosh, if you're gonna drink from water, look at a stainless steel water bottle. If you're gonna do lunch containers, instead of using the plastic containers, get those stainless steel ones. They have the silicone seals on them. You clip, 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 you lock those closed. Watch out for plastic lids and containers. Even you can get these little silicone rings that go around stainless steel caps for your mason jars, because the mason lids themselves actually have plasticizing agents in them. No plastic wrap, of course. If you're using a brand name wrap and you're putting it on your foods and you put it in the microwave and it's got fat or it's got acid, whoa, you just took a big dose. And then, of course, watch your canned foods and nonstick cookware. Milk, orange juice from glass, and use only a French press for coffee. So can you imagine how much plastics you're going to be getting if you take a little coffee ball that's covered in plastic and put it into your maker and, melt that sucker? That's going to be a lot of exposure. Now, thankfully, EWG, the Environmental Working Group, does a great job of telling us which particular cans are not lined with BPA. So watch out for alternatives though, the BPF, BPS, all the other little BPA, non-BPA products seem to have very similar hormone activity in human cell research and actually in vivo trials. So watch out for that. And here's another hidden source. And the gentleman who wrote this paper actually had a conversation with me about this, and it was fascinating. He said, my gosh, Tom, look at this. There's like thousands of times higher the level of BPA on receipts than there are in many other places. Receipts, grocery store receipts. And he wrote this fascinating paper, and he says, look at this. I can actually test. Somebody can grab a receipt. They can go eat some food, and I can see the BPA levels go through the roof just from the receipt exposure. I was like, wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, you can look at the urine, you can look at the blood, you can look, and you can find that as people touch these things, the levels go up. He said something fascinating. He said, and there's a caveat. He says, you can increase it by, 100 times by putting on a hand sanitizer or some sort of cleanser or lotion that has something called a dermal penetrating agent, right? Something that actually causes the skin to absorb more. And when you absorb more, you can get this massive level of BPA increase. So watch out going to the grocery store, putting on a hand sanitizer, and then grabbing a receipt. That seems to be a recipe for disaster. Those wet hands versus the dry hands is a massive difference in how much BPA you'll get in. Okay, there are other chemicals within our food system above and beyond the BPA, above and beyond the phthalates, above and beyond, the medications you might be taking. And it looks like those will include, pesticides, and they may include high fructose corn syrup. So there's 200 pesticides that were tested in particular studies, and they found that 106 of them activated that pixar. 106. Then also there's studies showing that when people have higher levels of organochlorine pesticides in their body, they have lower levels of vitamin D. So these are massive things to take into consideration. What I thought was fascinating, though, was this one, which showed when there was a higher level of fructose coming specifically, not just all fruits and everything, specifically from high fructose corn syrup, that there was a dropping in the level of vitamin D. There's upregulation of that pixar thing, the 24-hydroxylase enzyme, a downregulation of the 1-hydroxylase that makes vitamin D an actual hormone. So it's like recipe for disaster when the recipe contains high fructose corn syrup. So, where do I see that in my clinical practice? Of course, I see it people who are consuming soda pop and candies. But the kicker for a lot of my clients, when I see those high BPA levels, or we have, problems with intestinal issues and weight problems, we'll look at the flavored coffee beverages. Many people don't understand when you get a flavored coffee beverage, they're squirting in a syrup, and that syrup has high fructose corn syrup. So pay attention to that. Salad dressings, junk food, canned fruit, canned juices, all sorts of different things. All right. And the last thing that I see that's a big thing, and in my practice, I focus on digestive disorders, and intestinal problems. So I see a lot of these clients, but many people aren't paying attention to the fact that vitamin D is a fat-soluble nutrient. Vitamin D has to be absorbed in the intestinal tract. So, how do you absorb fats? Well, you secrete bile, and then the bile emulsifies the fats, and then the phospholipids bind around that, and they form micelles. And you also have to get lipase coming from the pancreas. There's all these little steps that need to take place that break the fats down and then bind them up and absorb them into the body in these little micelles. So you need to have enough phospholipids. You need to have enough bile, right? You need to have enough of the pancreatic enzymes that are coming out. If you don't have those pancreatic enzymes, then you might not be absorbing the fat. So the symptoms of fat malabsorption that I see in my clinical practice are often like, lower quadrant cramping after eating high-fat foods. You'll have urgent bowel movements. You'll have floating stools, lighter colored stools, maybe a mucosal sheen or a greasy layer on the toilet water, right? So these are all signs that you're not absorbing fats. Have you had your gallbladder removed? Is there some sort of issue that's going on in your intestinal tract that wouldn't allow you to absorb these nutrients? So let's look at this case study. All right, this is from actually Brazilian endocrinology journal. I ran across it years ago, and I was like, what? Are you kidding me? How is this even possible? So this is a 63-year-old female that they were looking at. She had osteoporosis. Now, the weird thing was she had osteoporosis, but she was taking calcium, and she was taking vitamin D, and she was taking a medication for bone issues. So, all right, she's covering the bases, right? I mean, she's got the calcium, she's got the vitamin D, she's got the medication for the bone issues, but then she's progressing downward. She's taking thyroid medications, and 12.6% decline or diminishment, decreasing in the spine, and 20.9% in the femoral neck. So her spine, her long bones of her leg, they're all going away, right? She's having this issue with osteoporosis. Well, they tested her and they find she's also anemic. Okay, so it's iron deficiency, okay, and possibly B vitamins. She's having issues with weight loss. Oh, weight loss. What does that cause? She's not getting enough nutrients in, okay? An elevated parathyroid hormone. Now, we're not going to get into the science of that, but recognize parathyroid hormone goes hand in hand with vitamin D. What does vitamin D do again? Oh, right. Vitamin D absorbs more calcium in through the intestinal tract, right? Amongst many, many, many other things. And as the calcium levels go up, great, then the body signals parathyroid, oh, no problem, we got enough calcium in circulation, it's all good. If you start dropping below a 30, 32 nanogram, depending on what study you look at, level of vitamin D, that usually means the circulating calcium is also low. So the body will trigger the parathyroid hormone, and the parathyroid hormone will start getting extra calcium from your bones. You'll start eating up your own bones. So it's super important if you have an elevated PTH to look at your vitamin D level. You may need more calcium to lower that parathyroid hormone. Okay, so she's got this sign of like, whoa, I'm taking vitamin D, I'm taking calcium, but my parathyroid is high? My bones degrading? I'm on these medications to reverse this and nothing's helping. What in the world could be going on? Well, thankfully, because she's had intermittent diarrhea, finally someone says, hey, let's test her for gluten sensitivity and celiac disease. And what do you know? Sure enough, she had a response. They took her off of gluten. Just taking her off of gluten, she got a 47.3%, almost 50% increase in the spine, and a 31.6% increase in femoral neck. That's unheard of. I mean, do you know of any medication that can increase bone mineral density like that? I mean, the reality is, if you're not digesting, breaking down from large to small, and you're not absorbing your nutrients, then how can you expect your bone to do its job? So really, whenever you're looking at absorption of anything, vitamin D included, definitely consider things that go on with the intestinal tract. Did you have some sort of surgery? Do you have an obstruction? Do you have some sort of condition or disorder that doesn't allow you to digest and absorb your food? Because if you can't digest and absorb your food, you can't digest and absorb nutrients as well from those foods. And even some supplements, if you're not digesting fats, including vitamin D, including vitamin K, including A and E and coenzyme Q10, if you're not absorbing fats very well, that could be an issue. All right. So now we went through our 5 reasons, right? We looked at maybe you're not getting enough. Maybe you're following recommendations that are not adequate. Maybe you're not getting enough from your food, right? Maybe you're not getting enough sun exposure, right? Maybe you have some sort of issue with the amount of sun exposure that you're not at the right angle, or you have too much skin pigmentation, right? Maybe you're having some sort of barrier to you getting adequate sun. You have some sort of issue then with chemical exposures, and those chemical exposures could be coming from medications and plastics. Those chemical exposures could be coming from your foods. So you got medications and plastics, you got your foods, right? And then on top of that, right, you could have that absorptive issue. And when you have an absorptive issue, then you can't get the vitamin D in. Those are the 5 reasons many people are suffering. But you know what? One of the biggest questions I get in vitamin D these days, hey, Tom, what is this deal with vitamin K? How come I'm seeing everywhere vitamin K is necessary when I'm taking vitamin D? Well, let's jump into that a little bit, okay? Vitamin K, there's multiple types of vitamin K, but in general, vitamin K in the human body is responsible for a reaction called a carboxylation reaction. What? What does that mean, dude? I don't even get it. COO, carboxyl group, COO minus. Dude, what does that mean? Well, COO minus means you have a negative charge sitting off of this little thing that's attached to proteins. And when you add another negative charge to that same protein, you now have a catcher's mitt. Remember how we talked earlier about information? One form mates with another form, changes its shape, allows for another thing to take place down below, it changes that form, and so on and so forth. Same thing here. Vitamin K will change the form by donating to the carboxyl group. It'll change its form of proteins to a shape that now has 2 negative charges. Calcium has 2 positive charges. 2 positive charges and 2 negative charges fit like a baseball to a glove. So when a protein is often made in the human body, it's made with 1 carboxyl group. Vitamin K comes along, gives it 2 carboxyl groups. Now that protein can carry calcium. You carry calcium around. So there are a couple of different proteins. I'm going to mention 2 of them. One's called osteocalcin, another one's called matrix GLA protein. Osteocalcin, just like it sounds, osteo, bone, calcium, in. Put that darn calcium in the bone, why don't you? So when the body is exposed to vitamin D, it knows it's going to be absorbing more calcium. So it upregulates the manufacturing of a protein called osteocalcin. Osteocalcin needs K. What happens if you bring in a bunch of calcium into the human body and that human body doesn't have enough K to drop it into the bone? Well, 98, 99% of all the calcium is going to be in hard tissue, bone. That's where you want it. But you also need it for electrical conductivity issues and in cells to transfer things. So it's not going to be isolated in the bone. Some of it's going to have to travel through soft tissues like your vessels in order to get where it needs to go. But you don't want it depositing there. You don't want to deposit calcium in your vessels, in your aorta. You don't. If you have it in your joints, it's a problem. If you have it in the brain, it's a problem. If you have it in your vessels, it's a problem. It can contribute to multiple disorders and conditions. So you really want to make sure you have adequate K when you're taking D. What did we say about D? Oh yeah, increase 3 to 4 times as much calcium, 30 to 40% versus 10%. Or if you're pregnant or lactating, it could be 80%. So if you don't have adequate K and you're bringing in calcium, but the proteins that normally carry calcium around and put it in the bone and matrix GLA actually takes it out of soft tissue when it's incorrectly placed there, you don't have any calcium regulation going on. So it could be a problem. In fact, there are earlier trials showing that when people increase vitamin D, they increase their rates of different heart problems. And it's like, well, why? Well, because calcium may have been depositing in the vessels. And when the calcium deposits in the vessels, then the blood can't travel through there as well. Makes sense? So really important when we're considering, especially higher doses of D, to consider also taking in K. And the specific form of K that allows that to happen is K2. So oftentimes you will see things that will have calcium, vitamin D, K2, or just D and K2. And some of the research has now pointed to the fact that perhaps supplemental calcium isn't ideal and dietary calcium would be more beneficial just because of the risk of deposition of calcium in soft tissue. So vitamin K summary, all in all, taking vitamin D may increase calcium in the body up to 3 to 4 times. So especially when you're vitamin D deficient. What's the kicker then? Well, you don't want it to deposit in soft tissues. Therefore, you definitely want to consider taking some vitamin K when you're taking your vitamin D. All right, I hope that answers that. And then we have actual analysis available these days. There's a vitamin K assay. If you are a person who's concerned about different bone conditions and having your bone degrade and whatnot, you can actually get a test. You can see where your vitamin D level is. Now you can also see where your vitamin K level is. And when you find out those 2 things, there are many researchers who say, look, why would you ever supplement with something like calcium if you have not already checked your vitamin D level and your vitamin K level? Because they, by far, will be more important than the amount of calcium you're taking. So, I heard one person say, gosh, you could be taking a bath in calcium and it wouldn't do you a darn bit of good if your vitamin D and vitamin K weren't at optimal levels. So definitely take that into consideration, right? So we know vitamin D is a gene-modifying agent. It has effects in every single cell of the human body. We know in certain cases it might be beneficial for nonspecific musculoskeletal discomfort or low back discomfort. We know that the levels that you might be being told might be a little lower than you would ideally want. We know that sun has to be at a specific frequency at a certain time. You have to get a duration. You might want an app for that. We know that now there are certain chemicals, whether they're medications, plasticizing agents, high fructose corn syrup, there are things and pesticides in our environment that might be causing you to have lower vitamin D levels than you want. And we also know that when you're taking vitamin D, you may want to consider also looking at K. That's my presentation for you today. Thank you very much for your time. All right, so let's see if we have any questions here. All right. What level of vitamin D and K do you have to take together? Well, that would depend. There are multiple different levels and there are multiple different forms of vitamin K. I would say, talk to your healthcare practitioner about that based on your test analysis. Now, once again, the level of vitamin D that you might need would depend on who you are. What is your BMI? What is your ability to, change that vitamin D from regular vitamin D into hydroxy vitamin D in the 25-hydroxy in the liver and in the kidney and your other tissues. So you would have to get your levels tested. There's a massive variation from person to person. As we saw, that one person took 5,000 IUs and they might get 20. Another person might get 120, 140, something like that. So you have to be cautious. Make sure that you're testing your vitamin D levels as much as possible. What form of vitamin D should you take? Emulsified versus liquid versus powder. Okay, so capsules oftentimes have crystalline vitamin D in them. Liquids are usually in a lipid-based, so it can be like an olive oil, MCT oil, something like that. And there's a challenge where some people who aren't eating vitamin D with foods, they may benefit from taking vitamin D in a liquid. So vitamin D is a fat-soluble nutrient. It needs fats in order to be absorbed optimally. So if you are not eating your vitamin D with a high-fat meal like salmon or nuts and seeds or a coconut curry or something like that, then yes, you want to be looking at an oil. Otherwise, the crystalline powders seem to work great, whether that's coming from a capsule or otherwise. If the can does say BPA-free, then you're not sure if that can has some other BPA alternative. So definitely look at that EWG website to see if you can figure out what's going on there. Sources of phthalates, there's a lot of fragrances that have phthalates. So anything in the house that may smell, a lot like something that's artificial, it's not in there. So people see these commercials of spraying substances over dog beds and it changes the smell. That's definitely a fragrance or coloring agent is oftentimes a phthalate. So be conscious of the fact that anything that makes your clothes smell different, your dishes smell different, your hair smell different, your neck smell different, those things oftentimes are oil-water mixtures. And anytime you have an oil-water mixture that has to be distributed evenly, there will be a high level of phthalates in there. Well, you can use glass. They have the silicone covers for things. So, oftentimes you can put a glass container and you put a little silicone cover over the top and that keeps the moisture in. So if you're worried about something, cooking unevenly or whatnot. When you sit down researchers in a room and you ask the vitamin D people how much they're offering to their friends and family, it looks like it's between 3,000 and 6,000 IUs or more per day to maintain normal levels. So some of the studies have shown that people actually utilize, 3,400, 3,500, 3,800 IUs per day is kind of what they need to maintain their levels in that, 40 nanogram per ml range. But once again, there's a massive fluctuation. So get your levels tested. Don't rely on external information to determine what's best for you. What about nanoparticle or micellized, or is that necessary for optimal absorption, especially in someone with malabsorptive conditions? Interestingly enough, I haven't quite seen that. So while the levels might climb just barely faster, I don't see in my clinical practice it's necessary to go for those super fancy delivery systems where they're, you wouldn't normally do like you would do like a micellized or whatnot. While that may be beneficial in some people with things like A, I don't see that as much with vitamin D. You would have to experience what's going on with a person's lab levels over time to determine if that's good for that particular person. But vast majority of people in my clinical practice are doing, an oil-based or a capsule-based vitamin D, and their levels climb just fine. Mind you, there will be some people with digestive absorptive disorders, of course. Some people who have body weight problems, of course. We see their levels don't climb as fast. So it might take a higher dose and it might take a longer duration of time, but those levels do go up over time. have I seen any toxicity cases? No, I have not seen any toxicity cases. In fact, there is some really neat research, and I evaluated a lot of the toxicity case research over a long period of time, that shows that toxicity really doesn't occur in the average person unless there's an exorbitant amount of vitamin D added. And it's interesting, it's usually coming from low quality supplement companies. So people who aren't really looking at their general manufacturing practices very well, and they don't dilute their vitamin D very well. So it turns out that vitamin D is highly, highly concentrated. And unless you thin it out, disperse it through your formula quite well, then it can concentrate in too high of levels for safety. Gosh, unless, someone's not doing their lab analysis, or they really have to do a lot of things wrong in order to mess up with that. So it's only a few cases in the literature, and go searching for them, they're pretty fascinating, that you actually see toxicity, and they're usually from errors from supplement manufacturers who aren't doing a good job at all. There is one other case that I can think of, which was a family, and this family was actually given equine, so horse peanut oil that had been added with vitamin D to supplement for the horse. The horse had low vitamin D levels, so the vet gave them this oil, and the oil had a tremendous amount of concentrated vitamin D in it. And the person who was doing the housekeeping and cooking for this family mistakenly used that oil for a cooking oil, and they made them a meal, and those people got toxic. So it's incredibly difficult, it appears, for someone to get that high of a level unless there's nefarious, someone's giving them levels, and or there's some drastic mistake. So can vitamin K2 be toxic? No. It looks like there isn't apparently an upper level limit on that right now, but it's can be expensive to take high doses. So you will find that many people will not have a risk of elevated vitamin K. So please let us know here at customer service if we can do anything else for you. Come back. We look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Thank you so much for joining us.